Listen closely, for this is a story that powerful men tried to bury. On a cold October night in 1927 beneath the hills of Vermont, something terrible was finally brought into the light. 11-year-old Theodore Whitmore ran through the darkness, his bare feet bleeding, his hospital gown torn and soaked with blood. Behind him, the white building of St. Catherine's Orphanage glowed against the night sky like a false beacon of hope. Theodore had been inside that building for 4 years, but not in the warm dormitories that visiting donors saw. No, Theodore lived in the basement in rooms that appeared on no maps, in corridors that no inspector ever walked. Tonight, he had overheard something that turned his blood to ice. The doctors were planning to reduce the basement census before next week's federal inspection. Theodore knew what those words meant. He had seen other children disappear, their bodies carried out in the night, marked as died from illness in the records upstairs. So he ran. He ran because staying meant death. The dogs were coming. Theodore could hear them baying in the darkness, their handlers shouting orders. Dr. Nathaniel Berkshire's security team had been mobilized. They would shoot him if they caught him, he'd heard the guards joking about it. Problem subjects need permanent solutions, they'd said, laughing. Theodore's surgical wounds split open as he crashed through the underbrush. The stitches from last week's operation tore free and warm blood soaked through his gown. The sedatives they'd given him still clouded his mind, making the forest spin. But terror pushed him forward. He could see a light in the distance, a farmhouse. Salvation, perhaps, or just another place that would send him back. Theodore collapsed on the porch and pounded on the door with fists too small to make much noise. When Farmer Roland Hutchins opened it, shotgun in hand, Theodore whispered 6 words before darkness took him. "The children in the basement, help us." Then the world went black and Theodore could only hope he'd done enough. To understand what Theodore escaped from, we must go back 19 years. In 1908, Dr. Nathaniel Berkshire purchased the Blackwood Hill estate, 340 acres of Vermont countryside crowned by a magnificent colonial mansion. Dr. Berkshire was everything Vermont society admired: Harvard-educated, decorated war veteran, published researcher. When he announced plans to establish an orphanage for foundling children, the state legislature applauded. They voted unanimously to provide $15,000 annually. Private donations poured in from New England's wealthiest families. The building itself was beautiful. 3 stories of white columns and manicured lawns, a chapel for moral instruction, bright dormitories with neat rows of beds. When benefactors visited, they saw healthy children in clean clothing eating wholesome meals. Newspapers praised St. Catherine's regularly. "A beacon of hope for Vermont's unfortunate children," declared the Burlington Free Press in 1912. But St. Catherine's held a secret. The orphanage operated on 2 levels literally. Upstairs lived 30 display children who were legitimately adopted out to good families. Downstairs, hidden in basement levels that appeared on no architectural plans, lived 60 to 90 other children. Children who had been purchased, stolen, or taken from families too poor to fight back. The basement that Dr. Berkshire constructed was a masterpiece of calculated secrecy. 3 levels descended beneath the innocent building above. Sublevel 1 contained the intake area where new children were processed like livestock. Each child was photographed, measured, and assigned a number. Theodore Whitmore became subject 247. His name no longer mattered. Sublevel 2 housed the dormitories, grim rooms with metal bunks and minimal heating. The children slept in shifts so someone was always awake to prevent escape attempts. Armed orderlies patrolled the hallways, though the children quickly learned that obedience was the only path to survival. Sublevel 3 contained the medical laboratories and surgical suites where Dr. Berkshire conducted his research. This level was accessible only through a single elevator controlled by key. The rooms were soundproofed with double-thick masonry. Ventilation shafts twisted through multiple turns, too narrow for escape. From the outside, the building appeared normal. Inside, it was a prison designed to swallow children whole and leave no trace. Dr. Berkshire told the children they had been abandoned, that no one was looking for them, that the outside world was dangerous. And for 19 years, he was right. For nearly 2 decades, warning signs appeared like ripples on still water, noticed but never investigated. In June 1913, Reverend Thomas Aldridge arrived at St. Catherine's with donated clothing. Mrs. Berkshire met him at the door but refused him entry. "Scarlet fever quarantine," she explained nervously. "Absolutely no visitors." The Reverend noted in his diary that he heard no sounds of children anywhere, strange for an orphanage housing 80 children. He rationalized that they must be confined to upper floors during the illness. In March 1916, Dr. Florence Pemberton inspected the orphanage's medical facilities. She examined the upstairs infirmary, which housed 28 children with detailed health records. When she asked to see the remaining 47 children, The state funding covered 75. Dr. Berkshire explained they were at a satellite facility in Rutland for specialized treatment. Dr. Pemberton's requests to visit that facility were delayed repeatedly until she eventually dropped the matter, overwhelmed by her patient load. In November 1919, delivery driver Joseph Kowalski noticed unusually large shipments of ether, surgical instruments, and pharmaceutical compounds arriving at St. Catharines. When he mentioned this, Dr. Berkshire explained it was for regional medical training. Kowalski also heard what sounded like children crying from beneath the building. Wind in the ventilation system, Dr. Berkshire assured him. More incidents followed, each dismissed or rationalized. In July 1922, social worker Agnes Drummond noticed that all children available for adoption were under 8 years old and seemed strangely compliant, almost sedated. When she asked about older children, Mrs. Berkshire explained they had behavioral difficulties and were housed separately. Agnes's requests to meet these troubled children were denied. She documented her concerns but took no further action. In February 1925, construction foreman Harold Simmons noticed ventilation shafts extending far deeper than the building's apparent foundation. When he commented on this architectural oddity, Dr. Berkshire became defensive, explaining it was required for the comprehensive sewage treatment system. Simmons also observed that coal deliveries were far larger than necessary for heating the visible structure, suggesting heated spaces below ground. He dismissed his suspicions, assuming the wealthy doctor simply kept the building excessively warm. Each incident alone seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a portrait that no one wanted to see. The truth was too horrible to contemplate, that beneath their respectable community, children were suffering in ways that defied imagination. So people looked away. They accepted convenient explanations. They convinced themselves that Dr. Berkshire's expertise justified what they couldn't understand. Dr. Berkshire's operation functioned through carefully designed systems. His acquisition network spanned 6 states. He maintained relationships with administrators at overwhelmed orphanages in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Montreal. These institutions received $100 to $300 per child transferred, officially recorded as administrative processing fees. Between 1908 and 1927, 89 children disappeared through this network. Dr. Berkshire also employed agents who haunted immigrant neighborhoods, offering free medical treatment for sick children. Desperate parents were told their children would receive care at a specialized facility and be returned within months. Instead, the children vanished into St. Catherine's basement. Their families, unable to navigate complex legal systems or speak English fluently, could not demand their return. The financial structure was brilliant in its corruption. St. Catherine's received state funding for 75 children, but Dr. Berkshire generated substantial additional income through research contracts with pharmaceutical companies. 3 companies, Northfield Chemical, Abbott Medicinal Supply, and Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, paid between $500 and $2,000 per completed drug trial. Dr. Berkshire conducted 15 to 20 trials annually, generating $15,000 to $40,000 beyond his legitimate income. He also received research grants from Boston Medical College and Yale University for his studies on childhood diseases and surgical techniques. Dr. Berkshire's staff operated in 2 completely separate worlds. Upstairs, employees, teachers, caretakers, administrative workers genuinely believed they worked at a legitimate orphanage. They had no access to basement levels and no knowledge of the research operations. They saw only what Dr. Berkshire wanted them to see. The basement staff knew everything. Orderlies, nurses, and laboratory assistants were carefully vetted and extremely well compensated. Dr. Berkshire paid them 3 to 4 times typical wages, ensuring loyalty through financial dependence. Additionally, he maintained detailed personal files on each staff member, documenting legal troubles, moral failings, or secrets that could be used for blackmail if loyalty wavered. Head nurse Wilhelmina Cross, a German immigrant with nursing training, oversaw daily management of research subjects. She maintained meticulous records of each child's medical history, experimental procedures, and responses to treatments. Her journals, later seized as evidence, contained clinical descriptions of suffering written with chilling detachment. Subject 247 exhibited extreme distress during procedure, she wrote about Theodore's surgery. Recommended increased restraints for future trials. Physical security was absolute. 3 access points existed: the main elevator controlled by key, a secondary stairwell behind a locked door in Dr. Berkshire's office, and an emergency exit that opened only from inside and triggered alarms. The children lived in a carefully constructed psychological prison as secure as the physical one. They were told the outside world was dangerous, that their families had abandoned them, that safety existed only within St. Catherine's walls. Those who showed defiance were subjected to isolation in quiet rooms, windowless cells where children were kept in absolute darkness for days or weeks until their spirit broke. The reward system was simple and cruel. Children who cooperated with experiments received slightly better food, bread with butter and apple. Those who resisted were punished with isolation, beatings, or withdrawal of pain medication after procedures. Over time, most children accepted their captivity as simply the way life was meant to be. Their eyes became hollow. Their voices became flat. They stopped hopping for rescue because hope itself had become too painful. Theodore Whitmore had been subject 247 for 4 years, arriving when he was 7. His mother, Irene, had been approached by a well-dressed man at a Boston charity clinic. The man said he represented a facility providing free treatment for sick children. Desperate and unable to afford medical care, Irene agreed to let Theodore go for a few months. Theodore never saw his mother again. He learned to survive by becoming invisible, by cooperating enough to avoid punishment, by preserving a small core of himself that Dr. Berkshire could not touch. In September 1927, events began moving toward revelation. Pharmacy clerk Walter Brighton at Burlington General Hospital noticed unusual patterns in Dr. Berkshire's prescription orders. Over 3 months, the doctor had ordered massive quantities of morphine, ether, and experimental sedatives, amounts far exceeding what would be appropriate even for a large medical practice. Brighton mentioned this to the hospital's chief pharmacist, who dismissed it. Dr. Berkshire runs an orphanage, the pharmacist explained. He needs supplies for multiple patients. But Brighton remained troubled and quietly documented the orders in a personal notebook. On October 3, Elizabeth Thorne, a new teacher at St. Catherine's, heard strange sounds through heating vents, sounds like children crying in pain. When she asked Mrs. Berkshire about it, she was told the sounds came from troubled children in the rehabilitation wing who sometimes had emotional outbursts. Elizabeth accepted this explanation, but Mrs. Berkshire seemed unusually nervous during the conversation. On October 8, Dr. Berkshire received a letter from the Vermont Department of Health informing him of a comprehensive inspection scheduled for October 20. For the first time in 19 years, he faced the possibility of inspectors discovering the basement levels. He called an emergency meeting with senior staff to discuss contingency protocols. On October 11 at 8 in the evening, Theodore lay in the sublevel 3 recovery room following an experimental surgical procedure. Still groggy from anesthesia, he overheard Nurse Cross and Dr. Berkshire discussing the upcoming inspection through the partially open door. "We'll need to reduce the basement census significantly before the 20th, Dr. Berkshire said calmly, as if discussing livestock numbers. "Prepare the transport list and arrange transfers to the facility in New Hampshire. Any subjects in critical condition or showing visible surgical scarring will need to be addressed permanently." Theodore's blood went cold. He understood exactly what addressed permanently meant. He had seen children disappear after being labeled terminal complications. Their bodies were taken through the emergency exit late at night, buried in the woods beyond Blackwood Hill. Theodore looked down at his own abdomen, covered in fresh surgical scars from the procedure that had just ended. He would be on that list. He would be addressed permanently. In that moment of overhead conversation, Theodore made his decision. He had been at St. Catherine's since age 7, subjected to surgeries, drug trials, and psychological torture, but nothing had broken his will to survive. Tonight, he would escape or die trying. Theodore's escape plan was desperate and simple. He knew the emergency exit on sublevel 2 was armed with an alarm, but the orderlies were slow to respond at night, often drinking in the supply closet during graveyard shift. At 2 in the morning, when the facility was quietest, Theodore picked the lock on his dormitory door using wire he'd concealed for weeks. He moved silently past sleeping children who watched with hollow eyes. They knew better than to alert orderlies, but they dared not hope either. Theodore reached the emergency exit and paused. He took 3 deep breaths, whispered a prayer his mother had taught him, and slammed the door open. The alarm's wail pierced the night like a scream. Theodore ran. His bare feet hit autumn ground, still warm from the day but cooling quickly. Behind him came shouting, crashing doors, and then the worst sound: dogs. Dr. Berkshire kept 3 German shepherds trained specifically to track escapees. Theodore ran with supernatural determination. His surgical wounds tore open, blood soaking through his hospital gown. The woods became a blur, branches tore his face, his lungs burned, the dogs barking grew closer. Then he saw salvation, a farmhouse light in the distance. Theodore summoned his last reserves and sprinted toward that light as if toward heaven itself. Roland Hutchins heard desperate pounding at 3 in the morning. Opening his door with shotgun in hand, Vermont farmers didn't take kindly to midnight disturbances. He found a child collapsed on his porch, bleeding and barely conscious. "The children in the basement," Theodore whispered, voice raw. "Help us, please, they're going to kill us." Then he passed out. Hutchins stood frozen for 3 seconds. Then he scooped up the boy, carried him inside, and told his wife to telephone Dr. Montgomery and Sheriff Preston Cole immediately. When Dr. Montgomery examined Theodore 30 minutes later, his face went white. The surgical scars, chemical burns, and injection marks told a story no legitimate orphanage could explain. Sheriff Cole documented everything with photographs while Mrs. Hutchins carefully cleaned and bandaged the wounds. "This child has been systematically abused," Dr. Montgomery said quietly. "These surgical scars are recent, multiple procedures. These injection sites suggest repeated pharmaceutical administration. These burns," he trailed off, too disturbed to continue. Sheriff Cole had served Vermont law enforcement for 23 years. He'd seen terrible things: violence, murder, desperate poverty's crimes, but this was different. This was methodical, calculated evil. "I'm calling federal authorities," Cole said. "This is beyond local jurisdiction." By morning, federal agents from the Bureau of Investigation had arrived from Boston. Special Agent Vincent Caruso took Theodore's statement while a physician monitored his condition. Theodore's account was detailed, specific, and completely unbelievable except for the physical evidence written on his body. He described basement levels, surgical suites, other children. He named Nurse Cross, Dr. Berkshire, several orderlies. He described experiments, drugs that made children sleep for days, surgeries where organs were removed and examined, psychological tests involving isolation and sensory deprivation. "How many children?" Caruso asked gently. "I don't know exactly," Theodore whispered. "We weren't allowed to know, but I counted beds, at least 80, maybe more." At 11 that morning, federal agents, state police, and Sheriff Cole arrived at St. Catharines with a warrant. Dr. Berkshire met them at the door, his manner calm and professional, as if this were a routine social visit. "Gentlemen, how may I help you?" he asked. "We have a warrant to search the entire premises," Caruso said, "including all basement levels." Dr. Berkshire's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. "Of course, though I should inform you we only have storage facilities in the basement." "We'll determine that," Caruso replied coldly. What agents discovered in the basement would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Descending into sublevel 1, they found filing cabinets containing detailed records on 89 children. Each file included a photograph, physical description, source of acquisition, and date of arrival. The children's given names were crossed out, replaced with subject numbers. Medical assessments documented their condition upon arrival with chilling clinical detachment. Malnourished but suitable for nutritional studies. Minor tubercular symptoms, ideal for respiratory drug trials. These were not medical records, they were livestock inventories. Agent Thomas Brennan found locked cabinets containing correspondence, letters from orphanage administrators offering problem children for transfer, responses from pharmaceutical companies specifying research needs, bank records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments over nearly 2 decades. Sublevel 2 housed 73 children at the time of the raid. Agents expected chaos, crying, panic. Instead, they encountered silence. The children sat on bunks watching intruders with eyes holding no hope, no fear, no emotion at all. They had been so thoroughly broken that even potential rescue triggered no response. One little girl, approximately 6 years old, approached Agent Brennan and asked in a small, flat voice, "Is it time for testing?" Brennan, father of 3, had to step outside to compose himself. The dormitory conditions were minimally adequate, children kept alive and functional but nothing more. Meals provided basic nutrition without consideration for comfort or taste. Clothing was generic institutional uniforms, replaced only when completely worn out. Recreation consisted of 1 hour daily in a windowless room with no toys, no books, no stimulation. Medical charts documented every child's experimental history. Subject 198's chart showed participation in 47 separate pharmaceutical trials over 3 years. Subject 221 had undergone 5 surgical procedures testing different appendix removal techniques. the same child subjected to the same surgery 5 times for methodological comparison. Sublevel 3 revealed Dr. Berkshire's true work in all its horror. 3 surgical suites equipped with modern operating tables and instruments. A pharmaceutical laboratory with thousands of vials and experimental compounds. Observation rooms with one-way glass where Dr. Berkshire could watch children's reactions to stimuli without their knowledge. But the most damning evidence was in Dr. Berkshire's private office, a locked room requiring the door to be broken down. Inside, agents found detailed research journals documenting 19 years of experiments, written in Dr. Berkshire's precise handwriting with scientific objectivity that made the content even more horrifying. Dr. Berkshire's journals described every experiment with chilling precision. Subject 247, Theodore W. age 11, 1 entry read, trial of experimental anesthetic compound B47, administered dosage 3 times standard, subject remained conscious throughout surgical incision, increased to 5 times standard, partial consciousness persisted. Note, compound shows insufficient sedative properties. Subject exhibited extreme distress, suitable for pain threshold documentation. Another entry, subject 189 Catherine M. age 8, deliberate introduction of pneumococcal bacteria to test new antibiotic compound. Subject developed severe respiratory infection as predicted, administered compound at 24, 48 and 72-hour intervals. Subject expired 94 hours post-infection. Compound demonstrated partial effectiveness but insufficient for preventing mortality. Recommend higher dosage trials with next suitable subject. Page after page, experiment after experiment, children reduced to data points in a mad scientist's quest for knowledge without conscience. Agent Caruso found a section marked Terminal Complications. This journal documented deaths of 16 children who died as direct results of experiments, catastrophic drug reactions, failed surgical procedures, or psychological breaks so severe children stopped eating and drinking until they died. Dr. Berkshire recorded their deaths with the same clinical detachment he brought to every observation. In a separate chamber reached through a narrow passage requiring crawling, agents made the most horrifying discovery. They found remains of at least 16 children buried in shallow graves beneath the basement floor, bodies covered with lime to control odor and decay. The investigation expanded rapidly as authorities struggled to understand how such a massive operation had remained hidden for 19 years. The answer lay in Dr. Berkshire's genius for deception and his understanding of human psychology. He had created a persona perfectly designed to avoid suspicion, the charitable physician caring for orphaned children, appealing to Christian values while explaining away unusual aspects of his household. Seized correspondence revealed that St. Catherine's was part of a broader network involving major pharmaceutical companies and respected medical institutions. Northfield Chemical Company had contracted with Dr. Berkshire for testing 47 experimental drugs between 1912 and 1927, paying $387,000. Internal company memos suggested executives understood the nature of Dr. Berkshire's research facility. One memo from Northfield's research director stated, Dr. Berkshire's facility provides ideal conditions for accelerated testing protocols. The controlled environment and compliant subject population eliminate variables that complicate standard clinical trials. While methods may be unorthodox, data quality is unquestionable. The investigation revealed Dr. Berkshire's network for acquiring children. At least 12 orphanage administrators across 6 states had received payments for transferring children to St. Catherine's. Benjamin Walsh, director of Hendricks Orphanage in Philadelphia, had transferred 23 children between 1915 and 1926. When confronted with payment evidence, Walsh initially claimed they were legitimate administrative fees. Further investigation revealed Walsh had been embezzling from his orphanage for years, using payments from Dr. Berkshire to cover his theft. Most disturbing was discovery of correspondence about Dr. Berkshire's planned research symposium, scheduled for December 1927. The event was designed to auction access to research subjects. Pharmaceutical companies would bid for exclusive rights to test compounds on designated groups of children. Medical researchers could purchase opportunities to conduct impossible-to-perform legally experiments. Dr. Berkshire had prepared detailed catalogs of subjects, organized by age, physical condition, and experimental history. Each child was described like a commodity. Subject 247 male 11 years, excellent health despite extensive prior testing, suitable for surgical technique trials, pain management studies, long-term pharmaceutical protocols. Recommended starting bid, $500 for 6-month exclusive research access. The symposium never occurred. Theodore's escape exposed St. Catherine's before the December event could take place. Legal proceedings against Dr. Nathaniel Berkshire and his co-conspirators began in February 1928. Dr. Berkshire faced 89 counts of kidnapping, 127 counts of assault, 16 counts of murder, and numerous federal charges. The prosecution built its case on three foundations: Theodore's testimony corroborated by other children's examinations, financial evidence of payments from pharmaceutical companies, and expert testimony that Dr. Berkshire's experiments violated every principle of medical ethics. The trial's most powerful moment came when Theodore spent 4 days on the witness stand. His testimony was calm, detailed, and devastating. When defense attorney Cornelius Blackwell suggested Theodore had misunderstood the medical care he received, Theodore looked directly at the jury and lifted his shirt, revealing surgical scars covering his abdomen. "These are not misunderstandings," Theodore said quietly. "These are what Dr. Berkshire did to me when I was a child who couldn't fight back." The courtroom erupted, the judge called for order, several jurors wept openly. On August 14, 1928, after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts against Dr. Berkshire. The courtroom exploded with applause. Dr. Berkshire, who had maintained clinical detachment throughout the trial, finally showed emotion. His face went pale, his hands began shaking. Between verdict and sentencing, extraordinary pressure was applied to prevent Dr. Berkshire's execution and limit pharmaceutical companies' exposure. On August 23, the federal prosecutor's office was burglarized. Intruders bypassed valuable items but ransacked files related to St. Catherine's, specifically targeting documents about pharmaceutical companies' contracts. Several witnesses reported receiving threatening letters. Most disturbingly, 3 surviving children disappeared from foster homes where they'd been placed and were never found. On August 29, 3 days before scheduled sentencing, prison officials reported Dr. Berkshire had suffered a complete mental breakdown, becoming catatonic and unresponsive. Prison physicians declared him mentally unfit to be sentenced or executed. He was transferred to Vermont State Hospital for the criminally insane, where he would remain for the rest of his life, never facing execution, never speaking again about his crimes. The timing was extraordinarily convenient. Prosecutor Maxwell Garrison suspected malingering, but prison physicians insisted the condition was genuine. Years later, testimony would emerge suggesting Dr. Berkshire might have been drugged by parties wanting to prevent him from revealing information about co-conspirators. Just when the investigation seemed endangered by intimidation, an unexpected figure emerged. Dr. Philip Ashford, Northfield's research director, approached federal authorities offering full cooperation in exchange for immunity. Dr. Ashford's testimony provided unprecedented insight into pharmaceutical industry involvement. He revealed how he'd first encountered Dr. Berkshire in 1912, visited St. Catherine's, and noticed the data consistency suggesting captive subjects under continuous observation rather than voluntary trial participants. When Ashford raised concerns delicately, Dr. Berkshire smiled and said, "Medical progress has always required certain compromises. We can continue at glacial pace that ethical restrictions impose, or we can accelerate understanding through more efficient methods. The children in my care are already abandoned by society. At least their suffering serves a higher purpose." Ashford should have reported what he suspected. Instead, he rationalized. Over 15 years, he funneled 47 experimental drugs to Dr. Berkshire for testing. The arrangement was extraordinarily profitable. Drug development timelines were cut in half, with complete control over variables and detailed data on side effects. Several medications developed through this process generated millions in revenue. Ashford knew people were hurt. Data reports described children suffering seizures, kidney failure, dangerous fevers. Some ended with subject expired, meaning a child had died. Each time, Ashford told himself unfortunate outcomes served a greater good. He never saw children as individuals, they were statistics, data points contributing to medical knowledge. His testimony led to criminal charges against 3 Northfield executives and civil findings against the company, resulting in $2.3 million in victim compensation. Despite overwhelming evidence, many complicit individuals escaped serious consequences through wealth and political connections. Pharmaceutical company CEOs avoided criminal prosecution by arguing they maintained appropriate corporate distance from operational details. While companies faced massive civil damages, executives retained positions, wealth, and reputations. Several wealthy individuals who'd expressed interest in Dr. Berkshire's planned symposium escaped consequences. Their attorneys successfully argued that mere interest didn't constitute criminal conspiracy. The pattern was clear. Those with direct involvement but limited resources faced severe consequences, while those with wealth and connections avoided accountability. Orderlies and nurses received prison sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical executives who funded and profited from operations paid fines but retained their freedom. This disparity wasn't lost on victims. Theodore, in a 1930 statement, said, "The people who gave orders and made money are still living in mansions while people who followed orders are in prison. That's not justice, that's just how power works." The 73 children rescued faced vastly different futures. Theodore was placed in a specialized Boston care facility providing medical treatment, psychological counseling, and education. The first year was extraordinarily difficult: nightmares, panic attacks, struggling to adjust to freedom's concept. But slowly, with patient support, Theodore began healing. By 1930, at age 13, Theodore had stabilized enough for foster placement with Aaron and Judith Brennan, a childless couple who specifically requested to foster a St. Catherine's survivor. The Brennans provided patient, unconditional love Theodore needed to continue healing. He attended public school, struggled initially with social interaction, but demonstrated remarkable determination. In 1935, at 18, Theodore graduated high school. He enrolled in technical college studying mechanical engineering. He wanted to build things, create rather than destroy. Theodore married in 1941 to Louise Patterson, a teacher. He was honest about his past before proposing. Louise's response was simple: "You survived hell and came out still able to love. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." They had 3 children. Theodore worked as an engineer for 37 years. He lived quietly but never forgot the other children. Every October 12th, his escape anniversary, he placed flowers at the memorial established at St. Catherine's site for children who died there. Not all survivors found Theodore's level of recovery. Some struggled with chronic health problems from experimental drugs, battled addiction, or spent lives in institutional care. At least 18 survivors died before age 40 from suicide, addiction, health complications, or violence. The trauma's long-term impacts demonstrated that 1920s medical and social services were wholly inadequate to address severe childhood trauma. In 1995, 2 years before his death, Theodore gave his final public interview. He was 78, sitting surrounded by photographs of children and grandchildren. When asked what he wanted people to understand about St. Catherine's, Theodore was quiet before responding. "Evil is real. Dr. Berkshire was evil, not misguided. He made conscious choices to torture children for money and prestige, but goodness is just as real. The people who rescued us, who fought for justice, who provided care afterward, they were just as deliberately good as Berkshire was deliberately evil. What I want people to understand is that evil flourishes when good people look away." The community around St. Catherine's had warning signs for 20 years. People heard strange sounds, noticed odd details, felt something was wrong. But it was easier to accept explanations than confront uncomfortable truths. "I lived a good life. I had love, family, meaningful work. Dr. Berkshire tried to destroy me, but he failed. Every moment of joy I experienced was victory over him. The other children who didn't make it out deserve to be remembered not just as victims but as individuals who mattered. That's what I want people to remember. They were children. Real children with personalities and futures that were stolen." Theodore died in 1997, having ensured his testimony would outlive him. See the children, believe them, question convenient explanations, never look away from uncomfortable truths. Somewhere right now, there's a child suffering in silence, waiting for someone brave enough to help.